Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A shooting at a high school in St. Louis, Missouri leaves 3 people dead and 6 others injured. The public inquiry into the Emergencies Act continues in Ottawa. We have an update from political reporter Brian Lilly. And inspired by the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, a Lethbridge couple turned their home into a pirate ship just in time for Halloween.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The search continues for 34-year-old Tia Blood, who was reported missing from West Lethbridge on October the 21st. Police discovered both her cell phone and abandoned truck in Cardston, but don't have many leads so far and have requested the public's help with their investigation. Cara Blood is Tia's sister, and she says this has been an extremely difficult time for her family and appreciates all the help they can get trying to locate her sister.
This is detrimental to not only myself, but to her kids, her family, her community as well. We have had several people reach out from her own community, from her gym that she attends, from her school, from her professors, from her peers, friends who have messaged us, more or less kind of conveying the idea that again, this is just extremely unlike her, obviously affecting them in several different ways. The current support that we're getting right now is primarily from our community, from our families, from our friends. That is the gist of the support that we are getting. More or less, we are very limited with the amount of support that we are receiving in terms of any kind of ground search. It's all just community-based, friends, family. That is the gist of it.
Please say if you've seen Tia Blood, please call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. Police in Lethbridge say they found the body of a deceased person in a rural area located west of the city limits. An autopsy has been scheduled for Wednesday at the medical examiner's office in Calgary to confirm the identity of the deceased and cause of death. Since the body was found outside of the city, Alberta RCMP are leading the investigation. Bridge City News will have more details for you as they become available. A gunman broke into a St. Louis high school on Monday, killing a woman, a teenage girl, and injuring 6 other people before police shot and killed him.
Officers arrived within a couple minutes of the call going out. They immediately made entry into the school. As kids were fleeing out of the building, they talked to some of the kids who told them that there was a shooter armed with a long gun. The officers began to clear the building looking for the shooter. Upon hearing gunfire, they ran to that gunfire, located the shooter, and engaged that shooter in exchange of gunfire.
A former Minneapolis, Minnesota police officer has pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter in the killing of George Floyd. This was just as jury selection was about to begin.
2 of the former Minneapolis police officers who were charged in George Floyd's killing were scheduled to start trial with jury selection. They were both charged with 2 counts, aiding and abetting murder and aiding and abetting manslaughter. One of the officers, J. Alexander King, pleaded guilty to 1 count of aiding and abetting manslaughter, and in exchange, the murder charge will be dropped, and he agreed to serve a sentence of about 3.5 years in prison, and that will be served at the same time as his federal sentence. The other former officer in the case decided to go a different route. Officer Tu Tao agreed to proceed with a trial called a stipulated evidence trial. And what this means is that he is going to agree to the evidence on just that aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter count. His attorney and the prosecutors they're both going to submit evidence that they agree to the judge, as well as written closing arguments. The judge is going to look at everything and then decide whether Tao is guilty of aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter.
Ottawa Police Service Inspector Russell Lucas says he was worried that the Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa could turn into a January 6th-style attack on Parliament Hill. Lucas is testifying at the Emergencies Act inquiry, which is continuing its public hearings for the next 5 weeks. Lucas says social media posts leading up to the protesters' arrival referred to the attack on Capitol Hill last year. The attack never happened, but the inspector told the commission that was materialized exceeded all expectations in terms of size and the scope of the demonstration. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been called in to testify at the public inquiry taking place in Ottawa. Now he's challenging the subpoena. I asked political reporter Brian Lilly if Ford is in fact required to appear and testify.
There's reasons that Ford won't want to testify that are political. There's reasons that people want him to testify that are political. I'm struggling to find out what the benefit of having Ford testify would be from a position of answering that fundamental question. Was it necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act? So I called up the Canadian Constitution Foundation, spoke to one of their people, and they said, we want to know why Ford didn't use other emergency powers available to him. That's why they want him there. So that would speak to the issue of, were there other options?
Mr. Lilly will have the latest for the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act coming up in the second half of our program. A major plank of Ottawa's affordability plan is expected to pass final reading in the House of Commons this week. The Liberal government fast-tracked Bill C-31 through the Health Committee in order to move a vote on the new dental care benefit to later this week. It's a key element of the supply and confidence agreement between the Liberals and the federal NDP. It is meant to be an interim measure while the government works on more of a complete dental care program. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he, like many Canadians, is concerned about the Bank of Canada's expected interest rate hike again this week. He says the central bank needs a different approach when it comes to inflation. It's a sentiment that was already expressed by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
What are the elements of the cost of living crisis? Cost of food, cost of gas, cost of energy. Those three elements, the interest rate approach will not have a direct impact on food prices. It will not have a direct impact because food prices aren't set in relation to interest rates. It won't have a direct impact on the cost of fuel because we know for certain fuel prices aren't impacted by interest rates. They're set by mercantile exchanges. They're set by OPEC's determination of supply. So those issues of the cost of living will not be addressed with the approach of just increasing interest rates. But what will happen with a sharp increase in interest rates? A potential recession. And that would be a self-imposed or a self-inflicted recession where hundreds of thousands of Canadians will lose their jobs.
As for the Alberta NDP, they've been acting like a government in waiting. That's according to our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. He says Premier Daniel Smith needs to stay focused on issues Albertans are most concerned about, including the economy, or else it may be an easier win for Rachel Notley and the NDP when next spring rolls around.
One of the traps that people have said that I've talked to over the weekend is that if Danielle Smith talks too much about things like the pandemic, instead of looking at things like inflation and the economy, the issues that polling suggests that Albertans are actually the most concerned about. So if the New Democrats can sort of stay on that message, take advantage of some of the changes that are coming on healthcare, for example, and make their pitch that way, I think that's probably where they're going to focus most of their attention.
The 2023 Alberta provincial election is slated for May the 29th. Rishi Sunak is Britain's new Prime Minister. He also becomes the UK's first Indian Prime Minister, the third PM in less than a year. Sunak met King Charles at Buckingham Palace, where the monarch officially asked the new leader of the governing Conservative Party to form a government, which is tradition. His first task will be to rescue the British economy. His predecessor's economic package, which included tax cuts, spooked financial markets with the prospect of ballooning debt and drove the British pound to record lows.
I am humbled and honoured to have the support of my parliamentary colleagues and to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to. The United Kingdom is a great country, but there is no doubt we face a profound economic challenge. We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together, because that is the only way we will overcome the challenges we face and build a better, more prosperous future for our children and our grandchildren.
A Russian court has rejected an appeal by U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner. She's still set to serve her 9-year prison sentence for bringing drugs into Russia. The 8-time All-Star center with the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury was convicted last August after police found cannabis oil vape canisters in her luggage at Moscow's airport. At her trial, Grinder admitted to having the canisters in her luggage, but testified that packing the canisters was an accident and she had no criminal intent. Well, it was a cooler day with spotty showers in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, those rain clouds should be leaving us, and we'll be back up to double-digit plus temperatures again very soon.
Yes, before you know it, double digits will be here. In fact, tomorrow, Wednesday, we're looking at the last single-digit day for a while. But here's the thing, though. Overnight low this evening, we're looking at -4. And by the morning, wind chill, we're going to feel like in the -10. So ouch. We haven't felt that in a while. It's hard to believe that just last week we were sitting at 25 degrees. But into Wednesday, mainly sunny skies, 9 degrees. And then after that, it's going to be double digits for at least a week. I'll be back later on in the show to tell you all about that.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. An old battle is being transformed into a virtual reality project for the ages. The Battle of the Belly River took place back in 1870 between the Blackfoot and Cree Nations and what is now known as the Old Man River here in Lethbridge. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, this project is a partnership between 4 local organizations to document the history of the battle from a Blackfoot perspective and turn it into a VR experience.
Students from Lethbridge College came together at Fort Whoopub to learn more about the Battle of the Belly River through first-hand oral stories passed down from Blackfoot elders. Kamina Weasel Moccasin is the Indigenous curator for the Galt Museum and Archives, and she explained the significance of the battle.
Back in 1870, on a day very much like today, there was a group of Cree and some Assiniboine who had attacked some Blackfoot camps that were along the river valley here. They thought that they were approaching just a small group and didn't realize that there were many clans from Kainai, Piikani, as well as some Skapi Piikani that were here. And so it was actually a very one-sided victory for the Blackfoot people.
Chris Hodgson Bright, a digital communications and media and multimedia production instructor at the Lethbridge College, says the VR project will feature stories from Blackfoot elders, which will then be transcribed, animated, and combined with 3D images of artifacts from the battle, along with a few other neat additions.
So we'll have drone footage. There'll be photogrammetry, which is a collection of about 100 photos of, say, the artifacts from 152 years ago. And then what we've done is actually turn them into a 3D model that you can manipulate on screen, but also we've 3D printed them, and they're actually here today, and they've been painted so you can actually see these artifacts and not worry about injuring them or ruining them.
Staff from the college say that the final VR product will be available for public viewing by the fall of 2023. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That's pretty cool. The City of Lethbridge is going to be renaming an avenue for Remembrance Day. The section of 4th Avenue South between Stafford Drive and 11th Street will be temporarily renamed Veterans Avenue for the week leading up to Remembrance Day. City Council declared Veterans Week November 3rd through November the 11th. Officials say they will work with the Royal Canadian Legion to ensure this becomes an annual event, including supporting Poppy Tag Day on the last Saturday of October. Well, there's some trash talking going on at Lethbridge City Hall. Residents in our city are being asked for their input on the second phase of the City of Lethbridge Waste Management Master Plan. City officials say until November 20th, they're seeking feedback on ways to reduce household waste, exploring incentives to encourage more residential diversion. Steve Rosey, the general manager of Waste and Recycling, says they're looking for people to comment on their waste reduction habits.
We want to hear about zero-scaping, grass cycling, opinions on repair cafes and reuse centers, opinions on single-use items, and household hazardous waste, and a broad range of things that we could look to improve over the course of time. So we're really excited for the opportunity through the survey that'll be available from now until November 20th, as well as the 3 virtual open houses that we'll be hosting in October and November, and we're hoping to do 1 in-person session as well out in the community.
Residents have the opportunity to engage at information sessions in person and online. The survey can be found on the City of Lethbridge website. The issue of food security is one of the biggest problems we're currently facing. That's according to Dr. Digvir Jayas, a University of Manitoba professor who presented at Lethbridge College on Tuesday. He had some interesting things to say about how proper grain storage and drying systems can sustain the world's food supply going into the future. He says 1/3 of the food of the world is lost once it's produced in poorly managed production systems.
If you took an average loss of the grain, so globally we produce 3.2 billion tons of grains. And if we lose 20%, that's a 640 million tons of the grain is being lost globally. If you take the amount of grain needed to feed the individual, and you calculate how many people can be fed with that 640 million of grain, is about 1.6 billion people.
Dr. Jaya says Canada produces 80 million tons of grain and exports about 40 million tons globally. A number of nonprofit groups are really hurting right now, and it's no wonder with the high cost of living these days. Food, fuel, and heating costs are all up and going higher as the Trudeau Liberals will be increasing the carbon tax yet again in the new year. Amanda Jensen is the Executive Director of Volunteer Lethbridge. She says volunteers are desperately needed right now throughout our community. She says many nonprofit groups need our help with some of the challenges they're facing.
I often think of the difficulty that the arts and culture sector had during the pandemic. They were hit tremendously hard, as you can well imagine, and are now trying to come out of that and see if it's going to return to pre-pandemic levels. But I would say an easy thing to do would be to support art and culture, sell tickets, sell merchandise, put up posters, buy tickets to events, gift things like that, rather than something from a big box store, that sort of thing.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Amanda Jensen from Volunteer Lethbridge and BCN's Naveen Day coming up after business news. Each year over the past 2 decades, Carrie Kerber and her husband have transformed their home on 6th Avenue in Lethbridge into a pirate ship for Halloween. Kerber says the idea of a ship came after the Pirates of the Caribbean movies were released. She said her family wanted to do something different as opposed to a traditional haunted house.
Skeletons. We love the pirate skeletons, and that's a slightly different theme. We did the haunted house thing, and people really love the pirate thing with the skeletons and all the fun that goes with that. There's a lot of wow. There's a lot of wow and a lot of, how did you do that? Is that really your house?
That was a lot of treasure there. Kerber says they continually add new pieces each year, and the entire setup takes about a month to complete. Wow. Well, it appears as though a lot of the snow we received recently in Lethbridge is gone, and the mercury will continue to climb throughout the week. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. A lot of the snow we received recently is gone, and we may be headed back up to double-digit plus temperatures this week. Jeanette Rocher is in now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we may be able to enjoy a few more backyard barbecues this week?
Yes, very likely, Hal. The days are getting warmer, not to mention shorter, though, so you might want to make those barbecues a little bit earlier on in the evening or in the afternoon, for that matter. Looking at overnight low of -4, going to feel like -10 with that wind chill by the morning. Into Wednesday, though, lots of sunshine, 9 degrees the high, climbing up to 10 degrees on Thursday, and then it's just double digits from there on out. High of 13 on Friday. Same thing for Saturday, 15 the high on Sunday, which is lovely, and then 10 degrees on Monday, not too bad at all. The average high for this time of year, 11, so we're going to be right in that range this week. -2 is the average low, 24. That was our high temperature on this day back in 1990, and back in 1939, it was the chilliest on record, which was -21. 8:09, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 6:22 p.m., giving us 10 hours and 17 minutes of daylight. On the west coast, Victoria tomorrow, high of 10 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. Chance of showers in the afternoon in Vancouver, high of 12 degrees. 8 degrees the high in Edmonton with sunny skies. Sunshine also in Calgary tomorrow with a high of 5 degrees. Looking at wind chills, not wind chills so much as wind factors of 20 to 40 kilometers per hour in both Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow. 6 degrees the high tomorrow in Saskatoon with lots of sunshine. Regina sitting at 1 degree. 3 degrees the high tomorrow in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. And all three of those prairie cities going to be looking at close to the minus teens in the morning with that wind chill factor. Very opposite story though in the central part of the country. 16 the high in Toronto. Toronto looking at a 40% chance of drizzle. 22 the high in Ottawa tomorrow. Chance of rain, and rain also in Montreal with a high of 23. And those cities are looking at UV indexes not not to mention humidexes, so a lot warmer there. 18 degrees the high in Fredericton, chance of drizzle there. Showers and drizzle expected tomorrow in Halifax. 19 the high in Charlottetown with a mix of sun and cloud, and 16 the high in St. John's tomorrow with a 40% chance of drizzle. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Are you tired of high energy bills? Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
General Motors says its third quarter net profit rose almost 37% from a year ago as vehicle sales began to rebound following parts supply chain troubles. The Detroit automaker says it made $3.3 billion US from July through September. That is up from $2.42 billion a year earlier. The increase was fueled largely by a 24% jump in sales in the United States, GM's most profitable market. The company says it is seeing improved supplies of computer chips, which is allowing it to build more vehicles and increase inventory on dealer lots. Adidas has made it official and ended its relationship with the rapper formerly known as Kanye West. The German sportswear company says that his recent anti-Semitic comments and actions are unacceptable, hateful, and dangerous. Adidas had said at the beginning of the month that it was placing its lucrative sneaker deal with the rapper under review and having pressure to sever ties. It is the latest company to end connections with the rapper, who has also been suspended from Twitter and Instagram over his recent comments. Coca-Cola's sponsorship of the flagship UN climate conference has sparked online backlash about corporate lobbying and influence. Environmental activists are slamming the company for its role contributing to plastic pollution and pointing to the deal as an example of corporate greenwash. Coke says its participation underscores its ambitious plans to cut its emissions and clear up ocean trash. The COP27 talks kick off next month at an Egyptian Red Sea resort town. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 178 points on the day to finish at 19,097. The Dow was up 337 points to 31,836. The S&P 500 was up 61 on the day to 3859. And the Nasdaq was up 246 points to 11,199. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 42 cents to $85 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 52 cents to $5.72 US. Gold was up 2 cents to $16.5349 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $19.35 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.65 per bushel, barley's at $9.68, canola's at $20.37, and corn is at $12.09 per bushel. Live cattle were up 8 cents to $151.68. Feeder cattle were up 93 cents to $176.60, and lean hogs were up 53 cents to $88.45. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.45 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the search continues for 34-year-old Tia Blood, who was reported missing from West Lethbridge on October the 21st. Police discovered both her cell phone and abandoned truck in Cardston, but don't have many leads so far and have requested the public's help with their investigation. If you've seen Tia or have a tip for police, make sure you call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. The public inquiry into the Emergencies Act continues in Ottawa. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have the latest for us in just a moment. And listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Fort Whoop Up is bringing Spooky back with their family-friendly Spooktober event taking place October 29th and 30th from 1 to 5 p.m. Enjoy an afternoon of creating spooky crafts, live blacksmithing, fun games, Halloween candy, and more. Registration is required. Fort admission prices applies, and membership holders can enter for free. For details and to register, visit galtmuseum.com. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 7 p.m. with a large group session, followed by small groups at 8 with coffee and dessert at 9. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca or call Park Meadows Church office at 403-327-4422. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
It is being called a king's ransom. The Canadian delegation to the funeral for Queen Elizabeth II cost taxpayers close to $400,000 in hotel rooms. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, joining us once again from Toronto. Brian, one of the rooms was right around $6,000 a night. Do we know who stayed in that room, and was it at Buckingham Palace?
No, Buckingham Palace would be free for the most part. This was at a place called the Corinthia Hotel, which a lot of Canadians hadn't heard of until they saw Justin Trudeau singing Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody at the hotel lobby. As one of the guests on the delegation played the piano. But the Corinthia is one of the most expensive hotels in that section of London around Trafalgar Square. And the $6,000 a room night, it's £4,800. Given the exchange rate that the government of Canada was using and the documents they released to me, that works out to about $6,086 a night, I believe. But don't worry, Hal, it comes with complimentary butler service and views of the Thames River. So it's completely worth it. One thing they won't tell us, who was staying in the room. Now, I initially thought, well, it had to be the Governor General. She would be the lead of the delegation, the most senior person. Well, if it was the Governor General and not the Prime Minister, which a lot of Canadians would automatically assume, you'd think the Prime Minister's office might let that slip. They're refusing to release the information of who stayed in the room. So maybe it is Justin Trudeau, or maybe they just know that whether it's Mary Simon, the Governor General, or Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, this is going to look bad on the government. Because we can all understand that the Prime Minister's not going to stay at the Hamptons by Hilton out by the Stansted Airport an hour away. That's where they sent the support staff to stay, by the way. They're not going to stay there. They're going to be in a downtown hotel. But did it have to be this one? Did it have to be this five-star hotel, one of the most expensive in the city? Did they have to charge a $6,000 a night room charge? Or could they all have stayed in the $2,000 a night rooms? By the way, when I compared all of the hotels around Trafalgar Square area where the Canadian diplomatic mission is at Canada House, there were more than 20 five-star hotels within a kilometer. This was by far the most expensive one. That's where we stayed. And it's just mind-boggling that we paid that much just for hotel rooms.
All on the taxpayer's dime. Brian, and all of this comes at a time when Canadians are dealing with an affordability crisis and high inflation. Does this make the Trudeau Liberals really look out of touch?
I think it makes them look completely out of touch. Canadians are seeing the inflation numbers every month and worried about the cost of food inflation over 10%. And then the Prime Minister and his entourage are spending $400,000 on hotel rooms for the Queen's funeral. As I said, we all expected it would be expensive, but this seems completely out of touch. Could they not have stayed at a four-star hotel in London? Which, by the way, a four-star hotel in London is going to be better than pretty much any hotel that they stay at when they travel in Canada. So, that's not to knock our hotels. We've got some beautiful, lovely hotels across this country in every part. But, I've traveled in some fancy circles at times due to my job. Never stayed in a $6,000 a night room. I'm not sure what one would look like, but everything about this screams we're not paying attention to the taxpayers. We're not paying attention to what Canadians are going through. We're just living our best life, and you're paying for it.
I think one of the nicest hotel rooms I've stayed at was the Banff Springs Hotel, and the stunning view of the Rockies, and I'll tell you, it was nowhere near $6,000 a night. Brian, the federal Conservatives were recently running radio ads in Newfoundland ahead of a vote in the House of Commons on making home heating more affordable. What do you think is the strategy here?
This was a very specific strategy. So on Monday, there was a vote on a Conservative Party motion on not putting up the cost of home heating fuel by not putting the carbon tax on home heating fuel, so exempting it. They were running ads in Newfoundland for a couple of reasons. One, the Liberal Premier there, Andrew Furey, he's put out a letter to the Prime Minister and his Environment Minister about a month ago saying, look, you can't increase the carbon tax on April 1st. Newfoundland has a long home heating season, right? It doesn't start in mid-November and end in mid-March. It's not Florida. It starts in September and ends in late May. So April 1st, it goes up. Fury has pointed out that people are already feeling the pinch. People are headed towards energy poverty. He says it would have devastating impacts. Look, he also detailed that he's trying to get people off of home heating fuels like oil. I don't know if you've ever heated with oil, Hal. It is incredibly expensive. And I remember living in a rural area, heating my home with oil, and I dreaded when the truck would show up to fill the tank because it was so expensive. That was before the current inflation people are facing. That was before the carbon tax even existed. And Fury said, you've got to make sure that people aren't put into energy poverty. We're doing our best to move them off of it, but it's going to take a while. Please consider that. The Trudeau Liberals said no. So the Conservatives had an ad voiced by Pierre Poilievre where he explained what the Liberals were doing and said, contact your Liberal and New Democrat MP to tell them to vote for my motion. Of course, none of them did. The Conservatives think that the Liberals are vulnerable in Newfoundland on this issue, that they might be able to pick up some seats. Look, the Conservatives win handily in Alberta. They win handily in Saskatchewan. They do well in Manitoba. They need to start picking up seats out in the East Coast, and they think this is a winning issue for them. So it was an interesting bit of strategy on a very small scale because there's not that many seats in Newfoundland.
Brian, some in the mainstream media are saying that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre appears like he may not be media friendly. Now, a recent example is our former colleague David Akin calling out Poilievre for not informing the media about the Diwali ceremony, I believe, that Poilievre recently participated in. Is Pierre Poilievre not allowing the media in? What are you hearing? What happened to transparency?
Well, look, you don't get invited to everything that leaders go to, and Justin Trudeau goes to a lot of events that are not open to media. I cover Premier Doug Ford quite often. We don't hear about every event. He does have to be careful, though, that doesn't become part of the narrative, Poilievre meaning. He's got to make sure that that's not part of the narrative. He skipped the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner. Guess what? I was a member of the gallery for more than 10 years. I never went. It wasn't my scene. It's not something that I wanted to do. But, you skip that, you end up in arguments with the media, you're constantly slamming them. That's going to help you with your base of supporters. But I keep saying that what the Conservatives need to do is win swing voters. Swing voters aren't going to be all jazzed about saying defund CBC and the mainstream media is the enemy. They might watch CBC. They might listening to the mainstream media. So that will help you with your base, but it won't help you with swing voters. So you've got to find that balance, and every party does, of trying to keep your base engaged, but reach out to people who voted for the other guy last time, but are not so impressed with them this time. You want them on your side come the next election. So that's the balance he's got to find.
Brian, the inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act continues in our nation's capital. Last week, we heard testimonies that showed some dysfunction with the Ottawa Police Service and the response to the Freedom Convoy. So far, there's been a lot of finger pointing, but not much has really changed here, has it?
Well, we found out that the city of Ottawa was incompetent, and so was their police force. They were the main response points for dealing with the Freedom Convoy. As I think we discussed last week, once you get off Parliament Hill, once you step onto the sidewalk off the hill, that's City of Ottawa jurisdiction. That's the Ottawa Police Service jurisdiction. It's not the RCMP. It's not the federal government. And, even today, they were the Commission Council was examining one of the Ottawa Police Service officers. And they would ask him questions like, did you know how many trucks were coming? No, we didn't know that. Okay, let's turn to page such and such of your notes. What does it say in your notes? And it would say how many trucks. Well, how many people were coming? Well, we didn't know that. Can we turn to page such and such of your notes? So they knew a lot of this. It was all in there. They chose to ignore it. It was an intelligence failure, as I said last week. It was a failure to plan, to anticipate. They could have allowed the Freedom Convoy to have their demonstration, to even take some trucks up onto Wellington Street in front of Parliament Hill and not have it turn into what it turned into. Their fundamental failure of allowing so many trucks to show up and embed themselves in front of Parliament Hill led to the situation that we're in.
One of the shocking things we learned is how the Ottawa Police Service didn't realize how big the convoy was. People from all across Canada coming in, hundreds and hundreds of people. And built its way up to thousands of people. Did the Ottawa police not watch the news, read a newspaper, or even look into social media to understand how big this was going to be?
It doesn't appear that they did, because you and I knew this from covering it, but I've spoken to friends who aren't in the media and that kind of, scrunch up their face and say, what, they didn't know? It was on TV news every night. It was in the newspaper every morning. It was on the radio all day. Or use the Google, use Facebook. They were posting, and they were completely unprepared. They received briefings from the Ontario Provincial Police. We found that out. They received briefings from the RCMP, from other levels of government. They ignored it. They thought that this was going to be a protest that would last Saturday and Sunday. By Monday at noon, everything would be cleaned up. That was not the case. That was never going to be the case. But as we find out more information, we find out that, it wasn't just that they were being blind to what was going on or ignoring it, or not paying attention to it. They were outright ignoring it because they were told people are coming until all restrictions, COVID restrictions, are lifted. That was in the notes of the officer that was testifying this morning. That was in the notes of other officers. They just decided, nah, we know better. They'll be here Saturday and Sunday. We'll have the streets swept up and clean for Monday afternoon. That was never the plan. And if we're looking to lay blame, it definitely has to be laid at the feet of the Ottawa Police Service for the most part in terms of how this started out. But that's not the big question in the inquiry. The big question is, was invoking the Emergencies Act justified?
Yeah, let me ask you that. Was it, in fact, necessary to be invoked? Have you seen any evidence so far, Brian, that invoking the Act was justified?
No, mostly what I've seen is incompetence by the Ottawa Police Service, resentment of the help that they asked for by from the RCMP and the Ontario Provincial Police. They asked for help. They asked for more officers, and yet at every turn they'd be asked, "Okay, great, we can send you more officers. What are you going to do with them? Who will they report to? Where will they stay?" Because these were officers coming in from out of Ottawa, and you've got a bunch of the downtown hotels taken up by convoy protesters. Where are they going to stay? The Ottawa Police Service had no plan. And so eventually, officers, senior officers from the OPP, from the RCMP, went in, and the local police were told by higher authority politicians, you're going to have an integrated command. They resented that. They resented the help. They fought against it. All of that delayed what was going on. And, we also found out that they had these things called police liaison teams that would actually negotiate with the protesters, try and have good relations. Some of the senior officers actually didn't like that style of operation and fought against it. So we're just finding out that even Brenda Lucky, there was a note from her. She's not testified yet, but there was, I believe it was an email where she said, even hours before the Emergencies Act was invoked, that not all police tools had been used yet. So that would tell me, no, if all police tools hadn't been used, then there was no need, because that's supposed to be why you invoke the Act. There's no other way to deal with the situation. Well, the Act, as we know, was invoked for politics.
Now, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been called to testify, but he's instead challenging the subpoena, Brian. Is he not required to appear and testify?
Well, that would depend on who you ask. And, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and the lawyers representing downtown Ottawa residents and businesses, they want Ford to appear. But the way that the Inquiries Act is written and the way this inquiry was set up, it only has the same jurisdiction as a civil court. And you can't compel an elected official like a premier, an MP, an MPP to testify in a civil proceeding like this if it relates to their job. So that will be argued out in court. There's reasons that Ford won't want to testify that are political. There's reasons that people want him to testify that are political. I'm struggling to find out what the benefit of having Ford testify would be from a position of answering that fundamental question. Was it necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act? So I called up the Canadian Constitution Foundation, spoke to one of their people, and they said, we want to know why Ford didn't use other emergency powers available to him. That's why they want him there. So that would speak to the issue of, were there other options? But this is, of course, a federal inquiry, and the federal government invoked the act. Did they speak to the province about it? We don't know. But the prime minister is going to testify. A bunch of his ministers will. If they decide not to, they're in the same position as Ford, by the way. They don't have to, but they've volunteered that they're going to testify. So politically, this could end up looking very bad for Ford.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Volunteering is an important part of our community and how many local services are delivered to those in need. To talk more about the importance of volunteering in Lethbridge, Amanda Jensen joins me from Volunteer Lethbridge to tell us more about how volunteers are an integral part of our community. Amanda, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, Amanda, can you give us a snapshot of how the Volunteer Lethbridge Association serves the community?
Yeah, Volunteer Lethbridge is I think of it as the glue for the nonprofit sector for anywhere south of Calgary, really. We're the only umbrella organization that serves the sector through help with volunteer management, which is what comes to mind for most people when they think about Volunteer Lethbridge, but also through we're the advocates for the sector, for policy or policy changes or changes in law. We often are the conveners of conversations that matter to our community, such as poverty reduction or diversity and inclusion, etc. And then the other thing that we do is we try to provide capacity building, training, experiences for the sector in Lethbridge, to raise all the boats.
Now, we talked a little bit before our interview about some challenges that nonprofits are facing right now. Can you tell us about some of these challenges?
Well, yeah, as we were saying, there's a tremendous increase in demand for services for the large majority of nonprofit organizations, which is also coming at a time of more scarce resources. It's probably not a surprise to hear that resources are becoming more and more scarce, and due to the way that most grant funding is set up, we really are put in a position of fighting over scraps. The pie is only so big, and so we're constantly in competition with each other, despite the appropriateness or the need for the mission or for the organization. So we're really at this yin and yang point, which was definitely exacerbated by the pandemic. Some of us were fortunate to get pandemic response dollars during those years from various levels of government, and those programs, you'll see many of those programs that were working and were built up during that time due to the extra influx of cash are now closing because the dollars just weren't sustainable.
And we talked about inflation, which is a hot button issue all across Canada. How is that impacting nonprofits?
Well, it's impacting us because money is scarce. So what we're looking for is investment from the business community, from various levels of government, but also from our neighbors into missions that matter to us. Whether it's whether cancer has touched your life and it's cancer research, or it's food banks, etc. When our basic needs are so hard to meet right now, the first thing that has to go are things that are not going to contribute to your immediate, survival. Mm-hmm. The other way that it, the idea of scarcity and tough times affect a volunteer center or a community, let's make it broader, a community, is we don't have time. We are often stuck in working more than one job, as you mentioned before, potentially doing a gig job to try to, to bring up the income to afford the groceries that have now, escalated in cost. So there's no time for a person to contribute to their community, to volunteer, to become involved in government in any way, to shovel a neighbor's walk, etc. So all of those things are lost when we are living in this this in scarcity.
And what can volunteers do to help with these challenges?
Well, I mean, we recognize volunteers as really the solution to helping nonprofit organizations with their human resource costs and to keep their human resource costs down, but also to bring different experiences, different perspectives to an organization that may not exist there through paid employment. But what volunteering also does on the other side of things is it's a mutually beneficial relationship for the nonprofit organization and for the volunteer. I know when I volunteer, I feel better about myself. I feel more connected to my community. I feel I'm gaining experiences that I'll be able to use again in another situation. There's so many reasons to volunteer. So it is so mutually beneficial to both the nonprofit organization and the person serving.
I know I've had a lot of fun doing volunteering, and it's just it's so rewarding. And then plus you're helping out like a very worthy cause when you're doing it. Amanda, can you walk us through the process of how one might become a volunteer?
Yes, I can. And it's changed. Volunteer Lethbridge has really changed its operating model almost 180 degrees since the beginning of the pandemic, just out of necessity and trying to meet people where they're at. So how a volunteer center traditionally runs is, what we think of is, we post opportunities and make them available to the community, and a potential volunteer then gets in touch with the organization, and a match is made. But what that didn't allow was for us as a volunteer center to actually know what was happening in between, whether matches were made, how they went, whether it was a good fit, what the turnover is, etc. So we are now centralizing, I suppose, I would call it, volunteerism in our community, so that we do become the organization that not only does the promotion of opportunities, but we meet with people to try to, increase the probability of a successful volunteer relationship with a nonprofit organization, based on what they bring to the table, how much time they have, their experience, etc. But then we take this one step further where we're screening them as well. And screening is something that we don't talk about enough, I think, when we're talking about volunteerism, is making sure that the volunteer is going to be safe in their chosen role, and that the constituents that they're serving, the organization themselves, are going to be safe, bringing this person into their organization. So that's a major change that we've made, is taking that step, so that it frees up the volunteer manager's time on the other end. So by the time the volunteer arrives at their door, they're ready to be trained and onboarded.
And you talked about matching volunteers with organizations. Can someone request to volunteer for a specific charity?
Absolutely. We do have people who come and they know exactly what they want to do. They know they want to work weekends with, the shelter, whatever it is, right? We just take away the administration then from that nonprofit organization, so that all of those admin costs and whatever screening is necessary is done by the time they get there. But then we can also be, that great person to, bounce ideas off of too. And, some volunteer opportunities we would never know exist that are just very unique and sort of under the surface. So this model also, I have to mention, allows for much freer movement of the volunteer in the community. So once they've been screened through Volunteer Lethbridge and want to try another volunteer opportunity, they can then go to that organization and show, the proof of screening from Volunteer Lethbridge, and all of that administration that would normally have to be doubled and happen again, is done. And you can also imagine the stress that is put on the Lethbridge Police Service or RCMP to continually be doing these criminal record checks, that we're removing all of that duplication.
Well, that sounds very efficient. And then, so how long does the application process take?
It can be really quick. Really, the only thing that we are a bit stymied by is the length of time for a police information check to be returned. It's taking about a month right now for that to happen, just administratively on the police services side. I know they're doing the best that they can, but that is for positions that that require that level of screening. There are many other positions that are, work a casino for your charity, or dishwash at this gala event, or sell tickets or whatever. Those sorts of things can happen pretty quickly, pretty immediately, because the level of risk is so low for them to be entering into that relationship with the nonprofit. So it really depends on the type of position that one is applying for.
And what about the family? Can a whole family work together as volunteers in an organization?
Absolutely. What a beautiful thing to do together. We've spent a couple of Saturdays, my family, with the YWCA and the Lethbridge Food Bank in preparing meals for their clientele and freezer meals. And so my kids are learning, and me, learning how to use a knife properly, learning how to cut, listening to music, just spending time together. And then we have this product at the end of the morning. It's a beautiful activity. And then there's plenty of others just like it.
And how is Volunteer Lethbridge funded? Where do the funds come from?
We get most of our funding is provincial at the moment through 2 operating grants. The rest, as an executive director, a lot of my time is spent looking for more opportunities, looking for grants, looking for programs that might fit. Sometimes we have to do that in order to bring new monies in, and then fundraising events and gifts from individuals who believe in our mission. We are a member-driven organization, so we do have, small income from memberships. So at any given time, we have between 100 and 150 nonprofit organizations that are paying to use our services.
And who are some of the organizations that Volunteer Lethbridge works with?
Volunteer Lethbridge is in a very unique position in that we are the capacity builders for other nonprofits that span the spectrum of age, whether it's sport, whether it's art, theater, social services, etc. We are blessed in that we can serve the whole swath of nonprofit organizations in the community and really be representative of the opportunities that are out there for the various interests that people have. So we're in a unique position in that we're not doing the work, but we get to support that work that's happening in the community across all parts of the nonprofit world.
Great. And what are some challenges right now that the people of Lethbridge can help with?
Oh my. Let's call them opportunities. There are so many opportunities. I mean, I often think of the difficulty that the arts and culture sector had during the pandemic. They were hit tremendously hard, as you can well imagine.
Yes.
And are now trying to come out of that and see if it's going to return to pre-pandemic levels. But I would say an easy thing to do would be to support art and culture, sell tickets, sell merchandise, put up posters, buy tickets to events, gift things like that, rather than something from a big box store, that sort of thing. Coach a sports team. Like those are more formal volunteer opportunities, but what we don't capture through this organization and probably can't is what happens with you haven't seen your neighbor in a few days and knocking on the door or shoveling the walk or taking a meal, etc. There are so many ways that we serve that are unnoticed or don't have this process behind it that we're talking about. So there's innumerable ways to get involved.
And Amanda, I'm going to give you an opportunity to brag a bit. Can you tell us some of the successes Volunteer Lethbridge has had over the years?
Oh, yes, I can. I've only been here since the beginning of the pandemic, but I can tell you that the former executive directors built up an incredible organization that is very trusted by the community. I can tell you, since I've been here, changing that operating model is I can't overstate what a big deal it is in terms of providing better service to the volunteers, better service to our nonprofit organizations, and therefore the community. And I will say that this operating model is being watched very closely by provincial counterparts and federal counterparts to see how it works. And so I do expect the next couple of years with this organization to continue to be revolutionary, to be a leader and a wayfinder for the sector that specifically serves volunteers. So it's a really exciting time to be here. Also, really believe so strongly in how technology can make our lives easier and make the connections between nonprofits and potential volunteers in its community more accessible. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting things that unfold over the next while.
Well, Amanda, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You as well. That was Amanda Jensen with Volunteer Lethbridge. I'm Naveen Day, and on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.